Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks to the organizers for inviting me to present at this very interesting symposium on scholarly publications as open data and university libraries. My name is Matteo Romanello from the University of Lausanne, and the work that I'm presenting today, entitled Building the Humanities Citation Index, what we call HuCI, Why and How, is a joint work together with my colleagues Giovanni Colavizza at the University of Amsterdam and Silvio Peroni at the University of Bologna. An autumn terminology before starting the talk, I will use humanities as a shortcut for arts and humanities, a domain that includes all the LAM stakeholders, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. So our main motivation for building a humanities citation index is to overcome a divide that has been emerging between humanities and STEM disciplines when it comes to the use of citation indexes. What is this divide? On the one hand, citation indexes are emerging in the sciences as tools of essential importance to manage the constantly growing volume of scholarly literature and also for the study of science itself. But on the other hand, humanities researchers cannot fully trust existing commercial indexes and cannot use them reliably for their research. So let's look at what are these limitations. So mainly the uneven coverage of these indexes in several respects. The disciplines and subdisciplines that are indexed, the languages of publication with a strong predominance of English, the types of publications that are indexed, mostly journal articles and no book chapters, for example, and finally, the types of citations that are taken into consideration, notably only secondary sources and no references to primary sources. This does not mean, however, that there do not exist citation indexes for the humanities, but what is lacking is an open and comprehensive index possibly managed by a public organization. I should also say that today's presentation is based on a paper that was submitted to a journal. The preprint is available on the archive, and there you find more details about our plan and proposal for building the Humanities Citation Index. So the types of functionalities that we imagine for HuCI are well exemplified by a prototype of a citation index that you see here in action that we have developed some years ago for the domain of the history of Venice. This tool that we call the Venice Scholar Index indexes bibliographic references not only to secondary sources, but also to primary sources. And in this specific case, archival documents of the Venice State Archive, of which you see a little example on the right. As a result, scholars can use the Venice Scholar Index to find out with a simple search which publications have cited and made use of a specific set of primary sources. And this is a functionality that can be particularly useful to find existing literature on a certain topic. By analyzing the limitations of existing citation indexes from a humanities perspective, we are able to identify the characteristics that we believe a citation index should have in order to be useful for and trusted by humanities scholars. First, a comprehensive coverage of sources. In the humanities, there tends to be a higher volume of publications in languages other than English, while the degree of multilingualism may vary from discipline to discipline. Also, in addition to journal articles, books and monographs remain highly important and need also to be indexed. And finally, besides citations to secondary sources, we find those to primary sources, such as literary texts, archival documents, but also paintings, vases, and other museum objects. Second is the chronological depth. In fact, publications tend to appear at a slower pace, but at the same time, older publications tend to be cited for longer than in other disciplines. And this results in the importance of indexing older as well as newer literature. Third, it's essential to expose as much of the citation context as possible in order to allow scholars to understand the function of a given citation. As you can imagine, providing such a rich context can be a bit tricky in the case of publications under copyright, but I'll come back to this later in the slides. And the last, more than a characteristic, it's rather our preferred strategy for building this index. In fact, For researchers, the more an index is comprehensive, the more it is trustable. In fact, the lack of sources impacts the perceived quality of the index. Therefore, we believe that the best way is to proceed by indexing topically coherent batches of literature. Libraries will play a key role in the building of a Humanities Citation Index, not only because they hold collections of digitized scholarly literature, but also because their bibliographic catalogs can be extremely valuable resources to support the citation extraction process. However, if we want to be able to seamlessly integrate library catalog metadata into HuCI, it appears that a certain number of requirements need to be met. First, the landscape of bibliographic data formats doesn't show clear signs of converging to a common format in the near future. Rather, we see new formats coexisting with older ones, but still widespread formats like MAR. As a result, HuCI will need to handle the fact that libraries will expose their metadata in various formats, still requiring to map them to a common format. Second, all the bibliographic resources of which we want to track citations will need to be identifiable by means of unique identifiers, including both primary and secondary sources for them. What is a citable primary source will vary from discipline to discipline. We have archival documents in history, inscriptions and papyri in Egyptology, various types of texts in classics, and so on and so forth. So ideally, each humanities discipline should come up with unique identifiers for their primary and secondary sources, and some disciplines are already in a quite advanced position in this respect. Third, there is an urgent need to take humans, so to say, out of the loop when it comes to access to bibliographic metadata, in the sense that this needs to happen as much as possible automatically by means of APIs and also by sharing regularly data dumps. Further, the granularity of bibliographic descriptions need to match the level at which we want to be able to track citations. This is crucial mostly for journal articles and book chapters, as library catalogs typically do not provide individual records for such bibliographic resources. And finally, libraries should be encouraged to define explicitly open licenses for their data so as to maximize the possibilities of data reuse. So given these requirements for Humanities Citation Index, how can we build it? What is the research infrastructure that needs to be put in place for this index to exist? We propose an infrastructure consisting of 4 different layers that you see depicted in the image on the right-hand side. And I'll go through each of these layers over the next slides. We believe that the way forward is to establish a distributed and federated architecture. In fact, the creation of a citation index for the humanities may certainly appear to many as a daunting task, almost impossible to achieve. But it appears much less so if we imagine creating it with the help of a network of libraries, which should play a key and active role in this process. HuCI is designed as a federated and distributed research infrastructure, also in order to allow libraries to take up this active role. Moreover, such an architecture will allow for the collection-driven growth that I just mentioned, and also for keeping the digitized collections as close to the holders as they need to be, due, for example, to copyright restrictions, while at the same time freeing citation data. In fact, since citations are facts, they're not subject to copyright laws. And we call this model, this access model to data, open by default and closed by necessity. Finally, there is also a technical reasons for such a distributed and federated approach. In fact, we estimate that the storage needed for all citation data for the arts and humanities, only for the journal articles published from 1994 to date, amounts to roughly 5.7 terabytes and to 30 billion of triggers. Such a size of data storage can probably be coped with in a centralized way, but a distributed solution will definitely be more efficient and performant when it comes to data querying. So the first layer of our proposed research infrastructure is the data collection layer. This layer consists of a network of libraries from universities and GLAM institutions who acts as the providers of citation data to HuCI. These libraries are responsible for the extraction of citation data from their digitized collections, as well as the curation of these citation data. Speaking of curation, I would like to emphasize that we believe that a modern concept of collection curation should also include the curation of structured documents, like, for example, citations, extracted by libraries automatically from their digitized collections. This federation of content providers guarantees to them the freedom to publish openly as much as they want, and they can. The minimum requirements will be to publish data under a public domain CC0 license, while the contents of their digitalized collection don't necessarily need to be open, but they can be accessible, for example, only to the local communities. Naturally, we understand that this may be a lot to ask from our libraries, and we believe that HuCI should facilitate actually this process. For this reason, we plan to build an open source software to support libraries in the process of extracting and curating citation data. We already developed a prototype of a similar tool for the Venice Scholar Index that I mentioned above, called Venice Scholar Library, and you see two screenshots here in the slide. Among its features, this tool provides machine learning components for the automatic extraction of bibliographic references, and also a user interface for the manual curation, meaning validation and correction of extracted citation data. And this type of software could be installed by each library in the network and help them to produce citation data out of their collections. The second layer of HuCI's research infrastructure is the data federation layer. And this is where the citation data are harvested from the network of libraries and aggregated into a federation of decentralized citation databases, which constitutes HuCI, to be implemented as a virtual triple store. Now, having federated repositories means that the data needs to be stored using the same shared data model across repositories. Otherwise, interoperability between them would simply be not possible. And one of the candidates for this shared data model is the Open Citations Data Model, which builds upon the SPAR, the Semantic Publishing and Referencing Ontologies, to represent bibliographic resources and citations, and uses also a combination of FOF and the provenance ontology to express statements about agents and data provenance. Another consequence of adopting a federated approach is that it implies the possibility of having duplicated records about publications and citations. In fact, it may well happen that the very same citation is extracted by two or more data providers independently, thus creating duplicates. And for this purpose, we also need to be able, to enable the harvesting of citation data from providers. And we need a layer of services, which constitutes the third layer of the proposed research infrastructure, to which I'll come now. This layer contains services that enable and regulate the flow of data between the different components of the Humanities Citation Index. These components are the virtual triple store of citation data, the federated network of libraries that act as data providers, also external providers of bibliographic metadata, such as archive and library catalogs, and finally, the providers of services that can enhance the quality of citation data, like disambiguation services and record deduplication services. More precisely, we can identify three types of services that are needed to make HuCI work. First, we need services to harvest citation data from the partner libraries, either via Sparkle-based APIs or via web REST APIs built on top of Sparkle endpoints. Then we need services that will provide access to external bibliographic resources. These can be particularly useful in the process of extracting and disambiguating references, for example. And here we'll need to define an API specification for data exchange and also a common format for mapping the various existing bibliographic data formats. And finally, there are services that will enable us to improve the quality of data, like disambiguation services, or services to remove duplicate records. And here we also need to define an API specification to build pipelines of these services and to make them work together with the citation data of HuCI. The fourth and last layer is the one containing software applications that will directly tap into the citation data contained in the HuCI virtual triple store. This is the layer of the research infrastructure, which is more directly facing future users of HuCI, who will be either humanities scholars searching for literature on specific topics, or also bibliometrics researchers interested in analyzing humanities citation data. We envisage two main types of applications to interface with HuCI's data. So first, software components that do not aim to provide front-end functionalities for the data, but rather to facilitate access to the citation data store in HuCI's virtual triple store. And second, applications offering user-facing interfaces to enable researchers to search over, to navigate through, and to explore the citation data in HuCI. An example of citation index interface is the one of the already mentioned Venice Scholar Index, but there exists quite a large number of interfaces that could possibly be supported. For example, the BOSS viewer, which allows for creating maps of science research based on citation data, or Wikidata's Scholia tool with its wide range of visualizations for the exploration of citation data. So what is next? What are the next steps for us to build this Humanities Citation Index? Well, we are in the process of building a consortium, of finding partners that are interested in, that have data and are interested in participating to build this index. And for that, we will organize a workshop probably later next year to coordinate the further developments of this, which will probably be writing and finding proposal to get adequate funding to support this quite ambitious project. So if you are a research library representative, a developer or provider of bibliographic services, or a bibliometrics researchers, do get in touch with us if you're interested to follow the developments of this project. To conclude, many thanks for your attention. And again, you find a preprint of the article on which this talk is based on the archive, where you find more details about the different aspects of the Humanities Citation Index that I've outlined.